Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the first installment of our exciting new series, the Capital Kids series, put together by our fantastic education specialist, Ms. Donis Barkley. We're so excited that so many of you in classrooms and in homes across the country are joining us today for this wonderful discussion of capital history and of the State of the Union. My name is Samuel Holliday, and I have the tremendous privilege of serving as Director of Operations and Scholarship for the U.S. Capitol Historical Society. As we continue to work in this hybrid model with virtual events, we love using the features of Zoom to interact with you, our audience, both here in the DC area and across the country. And one of the ways we like to do that is question and answer after every one of our programs so that you can talk to virtually, you can talk to these incredible speakers we get to come and share their wisdom with us. So if you have any questions for Kitty Felde as the program proceeds, as she talks about her book and about the State of the Union, you can put those questions into the Q&A section of the webinar. That looks like two speech bubbles, either at the top or bottom of your screen, depending on what kind of device you're using to join us today. Now, a couple of times during the program, we're going to ask folks to submit answers to questions we pose, and you can use the chat section for that. And that looks like a single speech bubble, either at the top or bottom of your screen. I'll also suggest that if you're having any technical difficulties, if it seems like you're having trouble hearing us or seeing us at any point during today's program, you can put that into the chat section as well. And I'll be answering and troubleshooting those questions in real time. So once again, any questions for Kitty can go into the Q&A section, and any troubleshooting or responses to questions we pose can go into the chat section. It's now also my great pleasure to introduce the President and CEO of the U.S. Capitol Historical Society, Jane Campbell, who is going to be moderating today's program. Jane, when you're ready.
Hello, hello, hello. This is a very fun adventure. This is our first ever Capital Kids series. Donis Barkley, who joined us as our education specialist not very many months ago, is a longtime classroom teacher, 26 years in the classroom from Alabama, and now here in Washington, D.C. working with us. And she has used her experience and her imagination to bring to us an idea, to bring authors of books that are designated, designed to tell the story of the Capitol for the next generation directly to classrooms. And so today we've invited families, classrooms, students, people who are interested at all levels to join in this conversation. We have as our first author someone who has been a friend of the Capitol Historical Society for some time. Kitty Felde is an award-winning journalist, a podcaster, a writer of children's mysteries, and they're all set on Capitol Hill. She's the host and executive producer of the Book Club for Kids podcast, which was named one of the top kidcasts in the world by the Times of London. The show won the DC Mayor's Award for Excellence in Humanities and the California Library Association Technology Award. Kitty is a veteran public radio journalist, winning more than a dozen Golden Mike Awards for her work covering baseball, politics, high-profile trials, riots, earthquakes, and immigration. We are so honored to have Kitty with us today. And so she is going to take us for a walk through her new book, a relatively new book, about a Fina Mendoza mystery during the State of the Union. But first, Kitty, tell us about the State of the Union from the perspective of young people. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Jane. It's always wonderful to collaborate with the Historical Society, which is doing great work there in Washington, D.C. And I guess what I would say is I'm trying to take your message out to the rest of the world to explain what's going on. As Jane said, I covered Capitol Hill for almost 10 years, and that meant I got to wander around the halls of the U.S. Capitol, which is, I think, one of the most wonderful buildings in the world. It's certainly the most beautiful building in Washington, D.C. And I guess for a wonky person like me, who loves history and politics and stuff like that, it was like Disneyland. You know, I had an e-ticket. My press credentials were enough to get me just about anywhere in the US Capitol. And I was a kid from California, and to come to the US Capitol was a big deal. And I never got a chance to do it. Most kids, at least before January 6th, had the opportunity during their 8th grade year to come to Washington, D.C. and get that tour and see laws being debated in action. I mean, it was an exciting thing. I never got that. We couldn't afford to come. So I wanted to be able to try to bring that experience to people who were like me, who never got a chance to actually be in the US Capitol, and then maybe to kind of inspire them to think about public service. That's why I started writing the Fina Mendoza Mysteries. And I'm going to take us into the State of the Union in just half a second. But I just wanted to tell you that, so Fina Mendoza, my main character, she's 10 years old. She's from Southern California, and her dad is a congressman. So she and her sister moved to Washington, D.C., and she ends up solving mysteries inside the US Capitol, like finding the demon cat of Capitol Hill. It's a cat that grows to the size of like a Mini Cooper. It hisses and spits, and it curses you with bad luck the rest of your life. In the latest Fina Mendoza mystery, which is called State of the Union, Fina is trying to find a mysterious bird that poops on the president's head during the State of the Union address. So we'll have to listen tomorrow night to hear whether or not that bird is in position to do the same thing to poor President Biden. I want to talk about the State of the Union because you hear those words, I don't know, maybe you don't hear them all the time, but I heard them all the time. What the heck is the State of the Union? Well, the way that my character, Fina, kind of describes it, she says that, the president comes to the Capitol once a year and reminds Congress of all the good things that he or she did during that last year and all the things that he or she wants them to do this year. And then after the speech, somebody from the other party gets to go on TV and complain about everything the president just said. And in my case, Fina's father gets to complain about them in Spanish. So he gets to do what they call the rebuttal speech. So that's what the State of the Union basically is. But why the heck do we do it? I mean, it can be long, it can be boring. You think, why do people have to sit in the US Capitol to listen to the speech? And everybody is there, it seems like. Not this year, we'll talk about that. But it's actually in the Constitution. It's Article 2, Section 3, and the language, it's very official, says, the president shall from time to time give to the Congress information about the state of the union. In other words, how we doing here in the United States. And recommend to their consideration such measures as he shall judge necessary and expedient. In other words, do them now. These are the things he wants Congress to do this year and the things that he thinks are important. Now, just a bit of history. It's only been called the State of the Union since the Second World War. Before that, it was just called the annual message that the president would give. And both of our first two presidents gave that address in person. You guys know who that is? Can we put in the chat? Does anybody know who the first two presidents are? I bet you know. Yes, you got it right. I know nobody's typing that fast, but you got it right. It's Jefferson and excuse me, I got it all wrong. It's George Washington and John Adams are our first two presidents, of course. But Thomas Jefferson didn't like talking in front of people. So he just wrote it and he sent it off, as if it were a letter. And that's what happened for a long time until after the 1900s, when again, President Wilson decided he wanted to give his message in person. Now, generally it lasts a little over an hour, maybe an hour and 15 minutes. The longest speech was actually a written speech, and it was by President Jimmy Carter. It was almost 35,000 words, not quite, it was 33.6. And you got to contrast that with the speech that President George Washington gave, which was only 1,000 words, 1,089 words. Another thing is the president can't just, yes, you got it right. Thank you, Abby Sparrow. Well done, you. George Washington and John Adams. I got it wrong. So the president can't just show up. He actually has to get an invitation, and the invitation has to come from whoever is in charge of the House of Representatives side of the US Capitol. And in this case, it's Nancy Pelosi. So Nancy had to send an invitation to the president. And usually it's earlier in the year. And this time it's, the latest it can possibly be just about March 1st. And I can't quite decide if it was politics or if it was maybe the Olympics that the president didn't want to compete with curling, perhaps. I don't know. I mentioned all these people who get to come. If you look at, and you almost need a seating chart to figure out where everybody is sitting and who they are. The vice president, you can see her this time, sitting right behind the president on the podium up there. The cabinet secretaries. Last year, because of COVID restrictions, there was only one cabinet secretary. And this year, just about everybody gets to come. I think there's 8 coming. I'm not quite sure. You'll notice that the U.S. Supreme Court is well represented. There's going to be a number of Supreme Court members, say that 3 times, will be there as well. They're the ones wearing what look like the choir robes, the black robes down in front. There's going to be military leaders, and they're easy to spot because they've got all the ribbons across their uniforms. And the first lady and the second gentleman, in this case, are going to be up in the gallery. And I believe the way they're setting up the seating because of COVID, they're going to try to have them spread out in the upper gallery, which is kind of the balcony seating around the House floor, to kind of let everybody be able to sit away from each other. During non-COVID years, that's where everybody gets to invite one person. They kind of call it a golden ticket. So if you're a member of Congress, you get to invite one person, and you can invite your spouse or your children. But usually what they do is they invite a person who represents something they care about, some issue they want to talk about, like education or gun control or whatever it is. They bring that person. I remember one time I ran into, I was introduced by the member of Congress to a doctor who was researching concussions that happened during football. So that was that member of Congress's issue. And that's what they talked about. They got to, I'll get to that. All right. This year, of course, because of COVID restrictions, it's going to be only the members who show up, except for the First Lady. The First Lady gets to invite a bunch of guests. So the only non-political people who are going to be there are going to be up sitting with the First Lady. Now, it can go long, I mentioned that. And as a reporter, you get about 2 minutes before the speech starts, they get a stack of papers. You get a paper copy of the speech. And you'll see all the reporters up there in the gallery, like quickly going through all the papers, seeing, is there something important the president's going to say? They want to know about it so that they can tell their listeners and their viewers all about it as quickly as possible. And occasionally, I mean, just like a school assembly, occasionally there's a wiseacre who will do something that will be kind of troublemaking. There's often a lot of bad behavior at the State of the Union lately. Didn't used to be that way, but now there's a lot of bad behavior. So for example, in 2020, at the end of the speech, Speaker Pelosi tore the speech up. She had a paper copy in front of her, and she tore it up. It was her way of saying, she thought it was all baloney. Not very polite. The president's right there. In 2009, a congressman named Joe Wilson yelled, "You lie!" from the House floor at the president. And all the reporters went, "Where'd that come from? Where'd that come from?" They're all trying to track down what happened. And then a few weeks later, his fans, shall we put it that way, Joe Wilson's fans. My husband was at the anyway, he ran into a bunch of folks who were like treating Joe Wilson like a hero at this particular social place. In 2010, U.S. Supreme Court Justice Samuel Alito didn't like what President Obama had to say about a particular ruling that the Supreme Court made, and he mouthed "not true" at President Obama. And in my book, it's a bird that behaves badly, very badly, by pooping on the president. And we'll listen to a little clip. I'll tell you what. So I have written this book, but there's also a podcast that goes with it. And let me just play you a little bit to kind of tell you what happens. You already know about the bird, but here you can hear it in action.
Mr. Speaker, the President of the United States. Every year, the president goes up to Capitol Hill to tell Congress what he wants it to do. It's called the State of the Union address.
Mr. Speaker, Mr. Vice President, members of Congress, and my fellow Americans.
This year, my abuelita and I got golden tickets that let us sit up in the House gallery to watch. But something strange happened. In the middle of the speech, a bird pooped on the president's head, and everybody in Washington was out to find that bird. Even me. My name is Fina Mendoza. I solve mysteries in the U.S. Capitol. I get some help from a big orange dog named Senator something. Together, we are on the trail of this mysterious bird that might be a mythical creature from the Caribbean called a Chickcharney. And it might just have a secret message from my friend Monica, or from me. You can read all about it in the new Fina Mendoza Mystery called State of the Union by Kitty Felde. I've got to go find that bird. Oh. Coming, Senator something.
So that's what you're going to hear when the podcast comes out. You can read all about it in the book. I also want to tell you that the night of the State of the Union is my very favorite night at the U.S. Capitol because it's different. During the day, everybody is busy and running around and all that kind of stuff. And the day of the State of the Union, people work the regular day, and then they take time off to go and have dinner. And there's a tradition, and I'm not sure they're still doing it because everybody's so mad at each other right now, but they would have a special dinner for all the lawmakers over on the Senate side of the Capitol. Because as you know, the Capitol's like this. In the middle is the big dome that looks like that. And the Senate's on one side and the House is on the other. And the House chamber is the biggest one. So that's where they're going to do the State of the Union because everybody's in there and they bring in extra chairs and people are sitting on top of each other, but dinner is over on the Senate side. So that's where they go do it. And then in the evening, it's dark. People seem to be more dressed up. They probably had a little bit of wine, maybe some beer, something else going on over at dinner. So they're kind of jolly. They're relaxed, I guess. And so you see this procession of lawmakers through Statuary Hall, which is where all the reporters are hanging out. Not all of them, but a bunch of them, because after the State of the Union, you need a reaction to the State of the Union. So a bunch of lawmakers will come through there and they'll tell you exactly what they thought of the president's speech. That's where the reporters are waiting for those kinds of comments. But in the meantime, they're waiting and people are processing through the hallway there. And I can always remember one time when Hillary Clinton was a senator and Ted Kennedy was still alive and they were coming back and she was on his arm walking through there. It was a very sweet moment. But it's like I said, everybody feels that there's something special going to happen. And you feel that there too. A lot of lawmakers like to get on TV. What a surprise, huh? So what they do for the night of the State of the Union is they'll decide they want to be one of the people who shakes the hand of the president as he comes into the House floor. So what they do is they station themselves at the end of the row of chairs, right along the aisle where the president's going to walk. So, and they have to get there about lunchtime. And they're there all day long sitting at the edge so that they can get their chance to shake the hand of the president and, quite frankly, be on TV. Now, where I got to sit, I didn't get to sit at the end of the aisle. I didn't get to sit on the House floor, but I did get to sit up in the gallery, not in a chair because it's so crowded. Yes, there I am. I better say something about this picture. So you're not supposed to cause a scene. You're not supposed to have people look at you, pay attention to you, et cetera, et cetera. But I happened to spot a member of Congress I know from California, David Valadao, a Republican from the Central Valley of California. And I've known him for a long time. He's a dairy farmer. And if you go visit his office, he's got chocolate milk in his refrigerator. At any rate, he was using his camera taking pictures. Now, we're not allowed to do that, but the members of Congress are allowed to bring their phones onto the floor, and he was taking pictures. And I saw him and I just gave a little wave. And then he was taking pictures and he said, he was going to take my picture. So I posed very badly, calling attention to myself, which you're not supposed to do. But he sent me this picture and I've always laughed when I see it. But I don't know, you can see how crowded it is up there. I didn't have a chair. So I had to sit on the concrete steps for years and years and years. That's how junior a member of the press corps I was. And my last year on Capitol Hill, I finally got to sit down. Well, I have to tell you, this chair, it wasn't a chair. It was a round bar stool that, you know, your rear end hardly even fit on. And you were really close to the edge and you felt like you were going to fall over it. But anyway, I was so happy to actually get off the concrete. One other thing that happens in there is that when the president gets in the building, for security reasons, they lock all the doors. I mean, not literally lock the doors, but you are pretty much stuck. So from the time the president enters the building until the time after the speech when he leaves, you can't really leave your seat. It's one of the plot points in the book that happens. And I think that's all I have, Jane, to talk about. Was there something I left out?
So we've got students who have joined us. And so you now know that Kitty was a reporter, and she was there for the State of the Union. I actually had the opportunity to be at the State of the Union speech one year when I was a local elected official, and my member of Congress gave me her ticket. So I got to watch George Bush give one of his State of the Unions up there in the gallery. And it's a pretty exciting moment because you look and really the whole of American government is gathered in one space. Obviously that was well before COVID. So what we'd like to do with our students is, if you've got questions about the State of the Union, or if you've got questions about what's it like to write a book for kids about the State of the Union, or what's it like to be a reporter who is trying to figure out what's going on, we'd be happy to take your questions. And so for those of you who are at a computer, you can put it in your Q&A. If you've got your teachers, you can do it that way. And so Molly wants to know, why did you write a book about the State of the Union?
Well, I've been writing this series of books. There's going to be 5 in the series that will take us from fall until fall again. And I wanted to try to capture what was going on in each of those seasons. And in winter, the biggest thing in the US Capitol is the State of the Union address. And I love that night so much because, as Jane said, you really are sort of witnessing the US government right in front of you. All these people who make military decisions or decide about, labor laws, the cabinet, the people from the cabinet, the president's there, the vice president's there. I mean, it's very, very exciting to be there. And I know it sounds wonky, but I wanted to share that with other people. And so for me, the highlight of winter is the State of the, that and snow. For a California kid, snow is a big deal. So there's also a whole thing about snow in the book. But other than the snow, the other big thing of winter in Washington, D.C. is the State of the Union address. It's like this big special party who you as I mentioned in the book, you get a golden ticket if you're invited. Jane got a golden ticket to actually come.
So now Maddie wants to know, how long did it take you to write this book?
This one took about 9 months. So you try to do a few words every day and it kind of adds up. I'm going to be working on the 3rd book, but I cheated on it. I'm working on another book right now about one of the president's daughters from 100-something years ago, Alice Roosevelt. She was Theodore Roosevelt's daughter. And so I'm working on a book where she's solving mysteries of her own in that era. So it's kind of been a little like vacation from Fina, but we're working on the 2nd season of the podcast, which is tied to State of the Union. And as soon as that's in the can, I'm going back to get Fina through the spring and the congressional baseball game and some more fun stuff that happens in the spring in the US Capitol.
Now, just so everybody knows, tell us, where did you come up with Fina Mendoza? I mean, who is she real? Is she, is she a composite of real people you've met?
Well, one of the things that kind of surprised me two things surprised me in the U.S. Capitol. And I'll talk about the dogs and then I'll go back to Fina. I didn't realize this, but members of Congress get to bring their dogs to work. And so when you're walking through the office buildings, the House office buildings or the Senate office buildings, you're like as not to run into somebody with a dog on a leash. And I was fascinated by that. And it made me think about, oh, these guys aren't just lawmakers. Yeah, this is one that is so popular. Winston, they put this sign out outside the office when he's actually in the office that day so that you can come in and say hello. And it kind of humanizes the lawmakers. The people who argue and scream at each other all the time about issues, suddenly they became real human beings. And I started to think more and more about that. And one of the members of Congress I covered for a long time introduced me to his daughters, and another one introduced me to his kids. And I thought, wow, what is the U.S. Capitol like through their eyes? So that was what I started thinking about. And many years ago, I mentored a young woman named Fina, and I asked her if I could use her name because I never knew her when she was 10 years old, but I could imagine what she was like. And so she was really inspired by a particular young woman I know very well. But there's not a real Fina Mendoza now.
So when did you first start writing the Fina Mendoza series? Nora wants to know.
Well, I started while I was still working on Capitol Hill. I always wanted to write a kid's book. I always wanted to, but I never thought I was good enough to write one because books for children are really, I think they're the hardest thing to write. And I'd written plays and I'd written a TV script and I wrote journalism stuff all the time. But for me, I was really nervous about writing something for who I think you guys are the toughest audience in the world, because you don't put up with BS. You know what's true and what's not, and you don't want to be talked down to, etc. So finally, I kept thinking about how much I loved the U.S. Capitol and how much I really felt like that experience is not shared by too many, especially people in California. It's like, if you ask people in California, where is Washington? We always point to the state that's above us. Nobody thinks about looking for Washington, D.C. And I wanted to make it real and accessible. So I just started in the morning because I worked for a radio station that was in Los Angeles, which is 3 hours behind Washington, D.C. That meant I had a few hours in the morning where nobody wanted me. And so I'd get up early and take my cup of tea and sit down at my computer and just started writing about Fina and her family and her adventures with Senator something, the dog, et cetera, et cetera.
So Amari wants to know, what president did you get to see make the State of the Union?
Oh, I saw President Obama. I saw President Trump. Those were my years when I was in Washington, D.C.
And when you're in the gallery, is there glass? Can you hear?
Oh, yeah. It's surprisingly small. I mean, you have to think, there's 435 members of the House of Representatives and another 100 from the Senate. So all those people are on the floor. And there are, 9 Supreme Court justices and a bunch of cabinet members. So you've got about, 600 people crammed together there on the floor. And then the gallery, everybody gets one ticket. So somebody have to do the math for me. It's a small building. It's not like you're in the Rose Bowl or something like that. It's much smaller. It's smaller than Nats Park. It's very small and you're enclosed. And the president has a microphone. So you obviously can hear from the microphone. So you can hear really well. There's no glass. The stairs are so steep in the gallery that you remember this, Jane, you all could take one wrong step and you'll end up landing in a lawmaker's lap.
Yeah, that would be bad.
It would be bad. And there's a railing that's not very high, so you could really kind of tip forward and fall forward as well.
So
but you feel very intimate.
When did you start writing your books?
I think I started writing them in 2013, I think. Thereabouts, 2014, I think.
And
yeah.
Were you in the same place when you said it took 9 months to write this book? Were you in the same place for that 9 months, or did you
Well,
carry
this
it
one
around?
was easier to write. The first book was the hardest because you're learning the characters. You're trying to figure out what the plot is. You have to figure a whole lot of stuff out before you can create that world. Even though it's a contemporary world, it's not like I'm creating Narnia or anything. It's a real place. The second book, at least you know who the characters are, and you know a whole lot more. So it took less time. The first book, I think, took almost 2 years to write.
And Maisie wanted to know, how did you get all your information?
Well, Maisie, you type in and tell me what kind of information you think I need to know, but I mean, that you're asking about. But some of that stuff I knew because I worked there. I knew the building really well. And I got to ask smart people. So for example, for the first book, which was about the Demon Cat of Capitol Hill, I went to the U.S. Capitol Historical Society and I talked to the chief guide, and Steve Livingood told me all about it and told me who to talk to and steered me on the right direction. And then I would ask questions of people who work in the Capitol at the architect for the Capitol's office. They're the people sort of in charge of keeping the building up. So they know a lot about location and things like that. I would hear stories from members. For example, they were doing a lot of construction in one of the garages, the Rayburn House office building garage. And people kept telling me stories about concrete falling on their cars while they were doing the work on that. That ended up in a book. People have great stories to tell. You just have to listen. There's wonderful research material available online as well. I talked to the House historian. Both the Senate and the House have official historians, and they're very helpful with information, with finding stuff from the old days. So for example, I found out my mother had visited the Capitol when she was in college. And in those days, Richard Nixon was their member of Congress, and she had visited his office. And so one of the people in the House historian's office actually found the logbook. Unfortunately, my mother didn't sign it, but she found the visitor's logbook from the year that she had visited. So they have some wonderful resources if you're looking for specifics there.
And so one of the things Joshua wanted to know, do you have any tips on writing a book? Sounds like going to the historians is a tip.
Well, and I tell you, the biggest tip of all is just sit down and write a little bit every day, because little bits add up. And a lot of this is what happens. Grown-ups say, I think I should have written a book. Well, yeah, you should have, but you got to sit down and actually do the work. So if you want to write a book, you got to just start writing. I kept journals for years and years. Here I've got some of, these are my blank ones, but for years I would write a journal, just get a cheap little notebook and write notes, and I would fill it up every day, just with things that happened. And that makes great research material years later when you can't remember what it was like to be 12 years old. You've got a record right there. But that would be my main suggestion. And as Jane says, research, research, research. You just got to think of some great places to look. I've recently kind of, what they say, fallen down a rabbit hole. I started doing some research with old newspapers from 1902 and 1903. And, there's great stories and there's things you never even thought about. And you get great details about what people wore and what people thought and what was going on in the world. So research is a wonderful way, and it inspires you. Those are the kinds of things you think, oh, that's a great little detail. I know what I could do with that. So those two things together are so important.
So Henry wants to know, do you have a dog? Or do you think there should be a dog in one of your books? You know what? We have dogs in all of the books. So if I can find a picture, a better one that you can see, I'll just hold this up. So you can see, this is a French Briard dog that belongs to a member of Congress from Georgia, not a real person, but, in my book. And he's called Senator something. And his name came because this congresswoman wanted to name her dog after her favorite senator, but she couldn't decide who her favorite senator was. And the people who worked in her office had to call him something. So they called him Senator something, and then the name stuck. So that's how he got his name. And in the second book, this little dog right here, see if I can do this without flashing it. His name is Saint Sebastian, and he belongs to the House chaplain. Believe it or not, the House of Representatives
has a religious person who does a prayer in the morning and is available there for counseling. And so Fina meets him in the second book and meets his ugly little dog who's not very smart. You know, he's just this really kind of, and Senator something is a little jealous of this dog. So there's lots of dogs in my books, but the truth is I'm a cat person because my name is Kitty. So we've always had cats. And as a matter of fact, right now, we got a cat from the pound 4 weeks ago. And I haven't actually seen this cat because she's been hiding in the closet all that time. So we say we have an invisible cat right now. She comes out and eats and does her business, and then she disappears. And we just haven't seen her since then.
Now, Jerome wants to know, have you met any other interesting people over the years? For example, LeBron James.
Oh, man. You know what? I haven't met LeBron. I have met Magic Johnson. And then this is like before even I was born. The guy who was the star of the Lakers way back when was a man named Jerry West, who was a part owner. I think he's still a part owner of the team. And one time I got into an elevator with him and I said, you know, did anybody ever tell you look like Jerry West except shorter? And then I realized it was really him. And basketball players weren't as tall back when he was playing as they are now. So, but I'm a baseball fan. So I met Sandy Koufax, and, I got to meet a lot of baseball players in my day. So those were my heroes, not the
I get to
basketball
tell
players.
you my story about meeting LeBron James.
Tell.
I met LeBron James when he was in high school. And I was the mayor of Cleveland. And he was a basketball phenomenon even then. And we honored him at a sports banquet. And so I met him, and of course he towers over me, and reached out and I said, okay, now listen, LeBron, people are going to say to me, you got to meet LeBron James. What do you know? What should I say about you? He was in high school. And he looked at me, didn't miss a beat. He said, Mayor, I want to tell you, this is what I want you to say. I am the first person to graduate from high school in my family, and I'm going to graduate with honors. And that's what I want to say. And I have never forgotten that. And I have told that story over and over again. And he, went on and is now a wildly successful basketball player, but he comes back home to Akron, where he's from, which is right outside of Cleveland, and supports the local community in a very important way. So now several people have asked. Emma from Maury wants to know, what's your favorite book? The favorite book you've ever read and the favorite book you've ever written?
Well, okay. It's funny you asked that, because that's a question we ask everybody who does my Book Club for Kids podcast. And everybody always says, oh, it's such a hard question. And when I get asked it, I have to say one book. It's called Skellig, Skelig, and it's by a British writer named David Almond, like the nut. And it's just a very special, quirky, weird book. And it's very close to my heart. I don't know why. It just touched my heart very much. And it's about a boy who his family moves to a new house, and the house needs some remodeling, and his mom is pregnant and she goes into labor early, and there's issues going on, and his parents are distracted, and they say, just stay out of the garage because it's going to fall down. And of course he goes in the garage, and there he finds this mythical creature that might be an angel, it might be an owl, it might be a skeleton, you don't know. And all the boy thinks he can keep his little sister alive if he keeps this creature alive. And all the creature wants is beer and Chinese takeout food. So that's my favorite book, is called Skellig. And I don't know, I feel like every book I write is my favorite book to read of my own. So we'll see.
Here's a question. What grade level are your books geared to?
We say grade 3 to 5. The Lexile is about 4th grade. The protagonist is in the 4th grade. I was an idiot, because if I had actually looked at the level at which they teach civics in the elementary school, she would be a 5th grader. So, but she just didn't seem that mature. So, and you know, we have a teacher's guide, by the way, which is, we'll give you a free copy there. You can get a paperback on Amazon, but we'll send you a link to the PDF. It's 56 pages, and it's written by Linda Marks, who was librarian in Washington, D.C. as well for many, many years. And she's written, and it's got all kinds of ways to teach everything from literacy stuff to SEL to, there's a little bit of Spanish language in here. You know, how do you make a bill? How does Congress make a law? Anyway, it's yours if you like it, teachers. We'll send you the link at the end.
And the link is there, and it'll be in the follow-up as well. Now, we got a couple questions about your not your writing, but your investigative reporting. And so we're going to put these together. What is the most memorable or bizarre interview that you ever did, and what made it so memorable and bizarre? And do you have any interest in returning to investigative reporting?
You know what? I really wasn't an investigative reporter. I fell into reporting accidentally. I fell into reporting because what I really wanted to be was Vin Scully. You know, he was the legendary Dodgers play-by-play announcer. And our local radio station here that had the Dodgers at the time had a sports talk show that no women listened to. And they thought, oh, if we have a woman on the show, then people will listen to it. I entered they had a contest, believe it or not, looking for a sports talk person. And I sent in a cassette tape because I was an actor and I had a pretty good voice. And, you know, 1,200 people. And then they opened it up to the men because they said it was discriminatory, which it was. And then, so there were about 2,000 people that sent in tapes. And I was one of the 10 finalists that got to do that. So I was called in for a callback. I didn't win. But it was baseball that drew me into reporting. And what I found out at the callback, because you had to do an interview, was it was one of the Dodgers catchers' wives talking to me, and she was telling me all kinds of things. And I found that people tell me things. And so that was my skill as a reporter, was listening. I was a good listener, and I could follow up with good questions. And so people trusted me. I was a straight shooter on Capitol Hill. I didn't trick people and then make them look horrible. And I listened to both sides, and I was a fair reporter. And so people trusted me. And so I didn't dig in deep to find any, you know, fabulous stuff. I think the best thing I found out was they had no sexual harassment training required on the House side in Congress. That was one of my big stories. And then a water story. But I didn't enjoy all the data research. Math is not my strong suit. And so looking at data, it was difficult for me. So I really relied on my strength, which was listening.
Well, and so here's another question. Jonathan wants to know, is there any chance your books would be made into an animated series?
Oh, your lips to God's ears. Yes, I would love that. I would love to see Fina come to life on the screen. Right now, all we have is the podcast, which makes pictures in your head. So if you kind of want to imagine what it would look like, you get to pick the pictures in your brain, but you can listen to the Fina Mendoza Mysteries podcast and listen to Fina's adventures. You know, we even got a member of Congress to come on the podcast. We wanted to do a special election episode, and there was a measure in Congress a couple of years ago that would lower the voting age. Right now, you have to be 18 in order to cast a vote. And there was a measure that would lower it to 16. And in the podcast, Fina doesn't think that's very fair. She thinks they should lower it to double digits. In other words, kids 10 and up could vote. And so they get a member of Congress, Mark Takano from California, who's a former English teacher. He came on and answered these fictitious characters' questions, but he would answer it as himself about why he thought that you shouldn't lower the voting age to 10. And these kids were pretty upset about that. But anyway, so you can hear it and then use your brain to create the pictures until Netflix calls.
And so the State of the Union happens every year. How many times did you get to go to the State of the Union?
I got to go 9 times. 9 times. 9 times. I loved it so much. I cannot tell you how much I loved it. It's just something special.
What TV did Magnus wants to know, what TV show did you write the script for? You said you wrote a TV script.
It was, you know, here's what happened. I was a theater reporter, and I was a theater reporter. I was an actor, and I was doing some writing for the theater, and I was in an improv class, and everybody in my improv class was writing scripts. spec scripts, sample scripts to try to become TV writers. And a lot of them were very successful. And I got an agent from my script. And then I got sent out on all these meetings, and I sold one script to What's Happening Now. They were trying to put together a package for reruns for syndication. And so I got hired to do one script. It's called Happy Face. But here's what happens. You write the script, you rewrite the script, and then they change everything. And so when I went to go watch the taping, 6 lines of what I wrote ended up on the air. 6 lines. I mean, I still get a check for like $12.50 every 3 months or something like that. And then they wanted me to be a staff writer. And I didn't like the people that much to spend that much time with them. And so I thought, what do I love more? Because I had been doing some freelance reporting at that time. And I thought, it was a lot more fun to go out and interview people than it was to sit in a room and try to be funny. So I stopped writing for TV.
And Hadley has a question. You said that, if you really want to write a book, you should write a little bit every day. How many hours a day did you spend writing your book?
Okay, so my attention span is pretty short. And I would spend 90 minutes, an hour and a half. And that would end up being about 500 to 1,000 words. That's about how fast I write. What I'm doing now is about 1,000 words a day. That's about how I do it and it just depends. If you're a slow writer, it could take longer, but I can't sit still that long. After about an hour and a half, I need to get up and move, or I'm going to drive myself crazy.
Now, Cam wants to know, have you noticed how the State of the Union has any similarities with what the Continental Congress did?
Woo, that's a good question. Well, the difference with the Congress was that they all got to talk. At the State of the Union, only the president really gets to talk. So it's kind of his show or her show, hopefully one of these days. So I would have loved to have been a little fly on the wall for the Continental Congress, but I believe they locked the doors. And, when they really got down to the contentious stuff, nobody was in the room. I mean, reporters. The members were there, but not me.
So Ethan wants to know, what's your new cat's name, the invisible cat?
The new cat is named Trudy Tomato. And I'll tell you why. My grandmother, Felde, was Gertrude, and my grandfather called her Trudy. And I liked the name. And then all of our neighbor kids were allowed to submit suggestions. And one of the suggestions was tomato. So it's Trudy Tomato. So I hope she's not hiding because she hates her name.
Well, you never know. Now, Amari wants to know, did the real Fina enjoy the book? Is she enjoying the series?
She is. And you know what? She teaches 2nd grade. So she's actually reading the book to her 2nd graders, which makes me very happy. Makes me very happy. Yeah.
Now, and one of the questions George was asking, does it get easier to write the more you do it?
Yeah, I know, George. But you know what? It's okay. I was talking to another writer about this. It's like magic. When writing is good, it is like magic, because suddenly your brain tells you things you hadn't even thought of. It tells you what happens next. Suddenly this character is talking and this new character shows up and they want to take over the book. I mean, it's like suddenly it's not you, it's this mythical thing that's happening in front of you. Those are the good days. There's a lot of bad days. There's a lot of days when it's just, you can't think, you can't come up with what happens next. You don't know what's going on. You don't know where you're going. You're stuck in a swamp in your brain. And those are the times when I kind of take a break and do some research to kind of, just take a break or take a walk or do something else. So I won't say it gets easier to write, but I do know that it's like exercise. The more that you do it regularly, even in small bites, even if it's 5 minutes, but you do it every day at whatever time of the day, 5 o'clock for 5 minutes, it becomes a habit, just like exercising. And then when you don't do it, you feel like there's something wrong with your life. So if it's hard for you, just take a little time to write every single day, though, so that it becomes part of your life. That would be my suggestion for getting over the hard stuff.
Okay, we're going to have 2 more questions because we're right up against our time, and we know that we always promise people we'll be over. And Will wants to know, was there ever a LGBTQ person who's been to the State of the Union?
In the State of the Union or at the State of the Union?
At the State of the Union.
Of course.
That.
Oh, yeah. Members of Congress. Actually, the congressman who was on the podcast episode called Let Kids Vote, he's a gay gentleman. So there are a lot of members of Congress who are either gay or lesbian. I don't know if there's any trans members right now, but I would imagine there will be in another few years. So it's very diverse, very diverse audience up there.
And here's the final question. Have you ever thought about making it into a graphic novel?
Ooh, gosh, I wish I could draw. I am really bad at art. I am probably worse at singing, but I am really bad at art. So I don't do it. And that would mean I'd have to hire somebody to do it. So I think I'm going to wait. We'll see if maybe somebody turns it into an animated series, or a graphic artist comes up to me and says, I'd love to do the graphic art version of it. So keep your ears up and we'll see.
Well, Kitty, we so appreciate you spending the time with our students. And we look forward to having people being able to read the Fina Mendoza Mysteries as they evolve, and so you can get through her entire year. We appreciate your being with us, and we want to remind people that we will include the link to get the teacher's guide in the follow-up. So those of you who've been participating can share, and this has also been recorded, and so that if anyone wants to see the recording, it's available through our website. So do you have a final word to offer as we go to the next thing we're going to talk about? What's next for the Capitol Historical Society? So don't hang up. But
the only thing I would say, Jane, well, two things. One is you can get a copy of the book through the U.S. Capitol Historical Society's gift shop on their website. So you can get the Fina Mendoza books there. You can get them elsewhere. You can request them at the library. And the other thing is I would say is try to stay up to see the State of the Union yourself on Tuesday night, because you're going to know a whole lot more about it. Look for who's in the audience right there. See if there's any reactions. You don't have to stay for the whole speech. And it should be kind of somber this year because of what's going on in Ukraine. But I would say do try to stay up till 9 o'clock and at least watch the beginning part.
And I bet we can be sure that there will not be a bird pooping on the president.
Oh, I don't know, Jane. There just might be.
I know anything's possible, but
it's live TV.
It's live TV. So let me make sure to invite you to our upcoming events tomorrow at noon. If you want to know about the State of the Union from a different perspective, we have two distinguished gentlemen who are going to talk with us, Michael Waldman and John McConnell, both of whom were speechwriters, one for President Clinton and one for President Bush, who actually wrote the State of the Union speeches. So they're going to talk about what it's like to write a State of the Union, to work with the president, to make a presentation to the United States Congress in good times and bad times. Can you imagine that President Clinton gave a State of the Union while he was in the middle of an impeachment trial? President Bush gave a State of the Union right after September 11th attack, when the country was unified. And 5 years later, he gave a State of the Union when the country was very divided about the Iraq War. And so they're different experiences. And these two, we had a little practice session with them, and I will tell you, totally worth coming to listen. They're quite engaging. And then on March 8th, which is International Women's Day, we're going to talk about what went on to name the first room in the United States Capitol named for a woman, named for Lindy Claiborne Boggs. And so we will have Farah Elliott, who is the House curator, who takes care of all these things, who was part of the naming process, and Jan Schoonmaker, who was Congresswoman Boggs's chief of staff for a long period of time, as well as we may have some other guests who served with Congresswoman Boggs, who will be sharing with us. So come join us on Tuesday, March 8th, and learn about what it takes to name a room in the Capitol for the first time for a woman. As always, we remind you that the United States Capitol Historical Society is able to provide these programs because of the gifts and donations from our members and guests. So thank you for making those contributions. Please keep them coming. We are chartered by Congress, but we're not paid for by Congress. We're paid for by people who believe in public history. So thank you very much for making your contributions. We look forward to working with you as we move forward. Thank you again, Kitty, for being with us. Have a great day and enjoy the State of the Union. Bye.